Find the Way. I'm your host, Mike Shervino, and Find the Way is your program helping you find hope for the road called life. We're really glad you've joined us from coast to coast here in Canada. And today, as we continue in our series called Climate Change, we're going to be unpacking some of the joys, the challenges, and the great opportunities to be effective parents. Now, I can't do this show on my own, so I've got two special guests that work with children and work with teenagers. I got Jen Wiebe here in the studio. Hi, Jen.
Hello.
Glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Steve Rokamad.
Hey.
Did I say that right?
You said it right. That's pretty good.
I
Nice.
nailed it.
Right.
Right
You're
out
not
of the
even
park.
Dutch. Wow.
Okay. And Jen, just tell us a little bit in a nutshell, what do you do for fun and for a living?
For fun. I hang out with kids. I have the best job in the world. I hang out with kids during the day. I also have two kids at home, and I get to just partner with parents, hang out with them, and get to hear their story. But I also love to play hockey.
You like to play hockey?
I do.
You were a professional hockey player.
Well, some might say, but no, not professional. I certainly try for it.
But,
I do know how to throw the puck around a little bit.
You can toss the puck
I
around.
do,
So,
I do.
Great respect. And I also understand you have pretty good elbows in the corner, but
Oh, yeah.
maybe that's
Oh,
one
yeah.
of the parenting skills we'll talk about. And also we have Steve. Steve, you and Jen both pastor together at the same church where I'm at, and it's called Mountain Park Community
Right.
Church. How cool is that?
That's great. Yeah.
And you lead a ministry to who?
To youth and young adults right now. Yeah. I've been doing at Mountain Park Church for 6 years now. It's actually the 6-year anniversary yesterday. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's been a good time. Been challenging, but also been exciting all at the same time.
So you work with middle school kids, high school kids as well?
Yeah. So when I was for middle school, it was grades 6 to 8. And then, yeah, also high school students up to grade 12.
You have a few children of your own.
I do. I have 5 children. Yeah, 2
Just
in
a
middle
few.
school. Yeah, 5 kids. So 2 in middle school, 2 in elementary, and then I have a 1-year-old as well.
So any church would be glad to have you. You got a ready-made youth group.
That's right. That's
Pretty
right.
much.
Okay, so we're going to come back. We're going to be talking a little bit about some of the challenges in raising children. But today I'm going to be unpacking in just a moment a passage of Scripture that's found in the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs is a book of wisdom. And it's a verse that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So a good question is that true? Can you really believe it? Does God's word stand the test? We're going to be back to talk about that here on Find the Way. But as we've always told you, you can find us at findtheway.faith. We'd love to hear from you. Get in touch with us. Share us your concerns. Maybe tell us how we can be praying for you. And we're going to be back in just a moment to unpack this subject today. I don't think there's any of us listening today that if you're a parent or grandparent or even living next door to someone's kid, you want to see that kid come out on top. You want to see them survive. But you know, the whole thing of parenting, it all starts as a dream. Doting, expectant fathers and their pregnant wives dream about the sweet little infant, all cozy in pink and blue blankets with ribbons and talcum powder and whatever else. And with smiles in their eyes, they turn to each other and vow, we're going to be the best parents ever. Guess what? Then the baby arrives. And suddenly when that baby arrives, the parents discover that the dreams, yells, and smells also has a reversible stomach. And this all happens at 3 o'clock in the morning. Does that sound vaguely familiar to anyone listening today?
Oh, yeah.
It's enough to make a grown man cry. And on a few occasions, I've taken one of my screaming babies and gave them back to their mother and said, you do something. And then she did. She passed that little daughter back to me. Well, it's pretty difficult to send them back to the manufacturer. And it's humbling to realize that you're not the wonderful parents that you thought you were. Where was that natural parental instinct when you needed it? Imagine a 200-pound man letting a 10-pound baby get him angry. I remember being at a swimming pool once and watched a mother and her son have it out about everything from running to yelling too loud at the indoor pool. And she was yelling louder than anyone, than her child. And she told him to get out of the pool, but he wouldn't. She threatened him, but he wouldn't get out because she wasn't able to get over and grab him and didn't want to get up out of her chair. And used phrases like, if you don't come back here, this is the last time, you're going to be grounded for life. Maybe you've heard and maybe you've used those expressions. So we come back to the subject today and say, where do we start? How do we parent? How do we do a better job? And Steve and Jen, you're going to weigh in on this in just a moment. But Proverbs says to train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they'll not depart from it. You know, when someone is drowning, it would be inappropriate to go to them and say, excuse me, I was taking a poll and wondered if you'd like some help. hello. Actually, the drowning person is frightened. They're disoriented and they don't care about you. And they'll actually pull you under if you don't watch out for them. What is needed is what's called a quick reversal. I remember learning that as a lifeguard, where you come up behind the person from the backside and pull them to safety without asking their permission. And maybe sometimes today, as parents, as you're listening in, you need to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to give someone permission to rescue me. And we're hoping that we can do that today. Because Solomon, who was the wisest man who ever lived, when he wrote this principle, this proverb, he says, train up your child. And the term actually has two meanings. The first thought is that of breaking and bringing a wild horse into submission. And that was done by putting a rope in the mouth of the horse and leading them. Now, sometimes our children will seem like wild animals, maybe like the wild horse. And that happens when parents allow their kids to have totally free expression, which is sometimes one of the parenting techniques that is encouraged today. And I just disagree with that. Because at the age of 3, little Johnny is lying on the floor in the supermarket screaming and kicking. And do you know what he's saying? Wow. I'm convinced he is pleading with you as a parent to gently apply some kind of instruction to his life to take him out of that situation. He's also saying, pick me up and take me home. Because at the age of 10 to 13, Johnny or Susie will be pounding on the floor. And I've seen where they've been screaming obscenities and shaking their fists in their own way. And you send them out for a timeout till they cool down, but better you send them to the room and tell them when they've cooled off, then they'll have to work around the house for a week. That seems a little strong, but there needs to be consequences. And consequences seems to be the politically correct term that we use in parenting. And Jen and Steve, I want you to weigh in on that in just a moment. But there's a better picture here as well. The term speaks about reining in a wild horse, but the nicer picture is of a mother who teaches her baby to develop a thirst. Like a newborn baby who is learning to feed from the mother's breast, often a baby will not nurse, and in the first few days, they have to be taught how to suckle. And that becomes a natural part, and that is the place of comfort. And those are the words that Solomon teaches. He says, you need to train your child in a way so that they'll develop a thirst to learn. So it's not always reactionary, but you as a parent are taking action. We're going to come back and unpack those first truths in just a minute. You're listening to Find the Way. You can find us at findtheway.faith. Jen is coming. She's ready to jump in.
I can
just see her itching.
Ready.
We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Find the Way. I'm Mike Sherbino, and Jen and Steve are here today as we're talking about helping your kids come out on top. And we've talked about that word, train up a child. It's not just enough to, the picture of reining in a wild horse, but it's also the picture of developing a thirst. But the interesting thought, and I thought for you, Steve, is that when he says a child, it means someone through all the stages of life, from infancy to when they leave home. Jen, I could tell you're wanting to jump in. What was standing out in your mind in this as we were talking about this?
Oh, I just love when you're saying training a child, because as a parent, you've got this baby and you're learning and you feel like you're training yourself. And then all of a sudden they become 1 year old and you think, okay, now I got to switch gears and I got to parent a little bit different and know that this child is unique.
So you're saying that parents need to realize that they need to change as much as their child is changing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because even with children, at a certain age, you can tell them do this and this, like, hey, you need to eat your food, and they'll listen, usually. You can control what they're doing.
Sometimes.
But then they get to a certain age, and their brains are developing, and they think, hey, I can do that a different way, and then they want to do it that way. So you got to have different ways of training, and boys are different than girls. Some kids are different than other kids. So parents have to really know their children in order to train them effectively.
Develop that phrase for me. I'm going to come back to you, Jen. What does it mean to know your children? And then, Steve, you can wrap that part up.
Well, I think you're getting to know them from the moment they come out of the womb. You're just getting to know this new baby that you're holding. And even by their screams, I know my daughter, she just screamed all night long, and yet I loved her, and she's got this beautiful voice.
But she stopped screaming now, right?
She stopped screaming now, definitely.
How old are your children?
12 and 10.
Okay, so that's a good thing.
You only have 2? Wow.
I only have 2.
Steve, what does it mean for you to get to know your kids? You have 5 children.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is where I'm thankful I'm not a single parent. But my wife, Jana, and I, we have different ways of getting to know our children. Jen is a lot more nurturing than I am, and I'm the fun guy. I do games with them and spend time with them. Either I like to go biking with one of my kids, jumping on the trampoline has always been something I do with all my boys, jumping and wrestling on the trampoline or on the bed, but spending time with them. But there's also different times within the day that I would take advantage of in talking to them, and I find driving in the car, taking advantage of that time.
What do you mean talking to them? What would you talk to them about? And then I'm going to ask you, Jen, what do you talk about to your kids?
Well, it depends on the age, but with the middle school kids, just ask them questions about their day. What was not necessarily, hey, how was your day? Because it's going to be a one-word answer or a whatever, or I don't know, or be a little more specific. Like,
and what your kids learn at school?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Nothing.
I don't know. Exactly, nothing. Why are you going? But or what was your favorite part of the day? Would be all recess. But just saying what was a highlight of your day, or a question like what made you laugh today, or something like that, and then dialogue happens from there.
So you're trying to draw them out.
Trying to draw them out with open-ended questions.
Jen, what do you do with younger children?
I also love talking about their passions, things that just get them excited. A child that just loves to teach sometimes may appear bossy when they're really young, but you get to see that gift of teaching that their father has given them. And I just love to see that. Or a child that's just singing all the time. And to talk about that. Do you love to sing? And just to talk about things they're passionate about. For me, it would have been hockey as a child, asking me a little bit about that. And it's just a connecting point.
So if somebody has a little girl, say 6 or 7 years of age, what would you do if you were meeting them for the first time? Because you do that. Kids come to you all the time. Parents bring to you their children. What do you say to them?
Well, I often get down to their level, look them in the eyes and smile. But I often just ask them questions. And then as you start this conversation, you start to see the things that they're passionate about. Just recently, I was talking to 2 kids in the church, and they were sharing about their passion for animals. And we just kept talking about animals. So that was really cool.
And I would think that as you do that, you build a friendship, a sense of camaraderie.
Relationship.
Like I think of teachers that impacted me when I was younger, and they seem to express a great interest in me. How do you do that with teenagers, Steve?
With teenagers, it's meeting them where they're at, whether that's an environment or the journey that they're in right now, getting to know a little bit about their background. And same thing, I think asking them questions about their life and encouraging them. I think middle school, doesn't matter what age the teenager is, I think they really need affirmation.
How do you do it as an older person? You know, you're a real old guy. You know, you got to be at least 40 or something.
At least. No,
so, like, how do you relate to a 15-year-old? And I know it's one thing if it's your kid, but you work with a lot of teenagers.
And he's got a lot of energy.
How do you do that? Like, what do you talk to? Help me out.
Well,
help parents out.
That's part of it. Is Jen says. Energy. It has to be exciting to myself. I have to have that joy for living life the way I do, and showing them, okay, this is how I live life. I love life and the things that I'm doing in life. But then when they see that, I think they desire that as well. They want to be joyful as well, and go through their days in more of a positive way.
We're going to pick it up in just a moment. We're going to come back and hear more about what to do as you raise your kids. But first, we're going to listen to a song by Hillsong called Lord, I Give You My Heart.
This is my desire to honor you, Lord, with all my heart, I worship you. All I have
Well, welcome back to Find the Way. I'm Mike Sherbino, and you can reach out to us at findtheway.faith. And if you're enjoying this program, I hope you'll take a few moments to look us up online, findtheway.faith. There's a place also where you can partner with us, because this program goes coast to coast through the generosity of people who are listening in. And as we're talking today about families, this is a program that you can download from our website. You can watch it over again. You can share it maybe with, if you're a grandparent, perhaps with your own kids, and so that they can be thinking about how they can better parent their children. Maybe as a group of parents, you might want to sit around and listen to the show again and just say, hey, what can we take from this? How do we do parenting better? Because when Solomon wrote to train up a child in the way that he should go, the child is a reference to someone who's going through all the stages of life, from infancy through launching for marriage. So that's quite an interesting phrase. But he says to train up the child in the way should go. And this is where I want to pause for a moment, because when he says in the way, it means that training up a child is something that you do by paying attention to your child's individual gifting or their bent, the way they're shaped. And the word way is actually a Hebrew word which suggests the idea of a characteristic. So the term means in keeping with, or in cooperation with, or in accordance with. What the Bible is actually teaching is that we're not to train them in our way as a parent, but in keeping with that child's way. I love what the Amplified Bible reads. It says that we should train up a child in the way he should go, and in keeping with his individual gift or bent. And when he is old, he'll not depart from it. Now, most often, it's not our kids who are the slow learners. It's we who are parents. And so let me shout out to you folks. If you're having troubles with your kids, pause and say, I wonder if there's something different that I need to be doing. We want to train our kids in the way that we were trained. And sometimes that is incredibly frustrating for them. We read in the book of Ephesians where it says fathers are not to exasperate their kids or frustrate them. I think the reason the Apostle Paul wrote that is for the very reason I've just said. You know, you get raised in a certain way and then you want to pass it on to your kid. I wanted to do that. I wanted to raise my daughters the way that my father raised me, and it just didn't cut it. It just didn't work. And so then we go on and we say, well, what do we have to do? So if I'm going to raise them in the way that's in keeping with their bent, I need to be adaptable and I need to be sensitive, because the way is a reflection of what God's design is for my child. And central to my task of raising my children is to help them to discover what God's will is for their life. And that's a challenging task at best. And then it says, train them up in the way that they should go. So it implies that a significant time has been spent by the parents in mentoring and training. And Steve and Jen, you're here with me today, and I want you to talk about that in just a moment. How do you build in a discipline every day? See, a key distinctive is in not telling your child what to do, but in teaching them how to think through a scenario so they don't fall to temptation or an impulsive move. In Psalm 119, the psalmist speaks some incredible words of wisdom. He describes the youth who is on this path. And he begins with a question. He says, how can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your word. And then he said, I seek you with all of my heart. Don't let me stray from your commands. All of us are devastated as we see many of the poor decisions that young people are making today and have been making for many years. Well, why is that? I believe it's because parents, for the most part, have not been intentional in teaching them not just that there are consequences, but in showing them a better way. And also, as Proverbs describes, helping your child to think through the scenario so that they'll realize what's going to happen dependent on the decision they make. And then we want to just talk briefly, as I wrap up this segment, there's a phrase that says, and when he is old, they'll not depart from it. What we find here is the completion of a proverb. It's not a promise, but there is an indicator that if you're active in the parenting role, your child will make the right choices. Growing old refers to having hair on their chin. Now, that's not a comforting thought for those of you who are women. But what it means simply is that it's a sign of maturity, because there comes a time when your child should leave the nest and they are responsible for their decisions. And so as we begin to think about that, I'm going to come back to you right now, Jen, and then Steve, and say, how do you develop that discipline? How do you speak life into this long process that just doesn't happen overnight, but it's a commitment for that, 18 to 20 years. And even now with my kids who have grown up, I'm finding I still need to learn to parent long distance, even when my kids have left home. We're going to be right back, but let me remind you, you're listening to Find the Way, and you can find us at findtheway.faith. Well, welcome back to Find the Way. I'm Mike Sherbino. I've got Jen Weeb with me and Steve Rookema. I'm so glad you guys are here as you lead ministries at Mountain Park Community Church in a strange part of the world called Abbotsford.
Yeah, very strange. No.
Where's that? But anyhow, how cool to have you here today. Parenting has changed a lot, especially in the last 10 years with the internet. Wouldn't you say, Steve?
Right, yeah. You mentioned earlier about training our kids in the way that our parents did, because, our parents are the biggest influence in a child's life. And I know my parents were a big influence in my life, but my parents didn't teach me anything about internet or how to deal with my smartphone or YouTube or anything like that, right? So this is the first parent generation that has to deal with the challenges of the internet with your devices and so on, and video games are way more than they were when I was a kid.
So you're going to throw a downer on us all and say, just get rid of all your kids'
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because internet can be used for great things as well. There's so many different resources out there. We just have to be pointed in the right direction.
What do you do with your kids?
With my kids, we have boundaries. So my oldest, I have 5 kids, like I said, and my oldest are boys. They're into video games, as most boys are into video games. So we set up boundaries. They can play video games for the half an hour bus ride, and then they don't play at all during the week. But then they play on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, an hour for each day. And that goes over a little bit. We're a little flex with that, but they know that there's a limit to how much they can play.
How long did it take you to figure out that breakdown of time?
A couple of years. Well, it depends on the child too, right? Because we've noticed that if our kids, especially one of our children, if he plays for too long, we notice after he's played video games where his temper is short, his mood is changed because he's in that world, in that zone of playing the video game, and then you step out into the real world and people aren't acting the way that you would expect them to.
And that's very helpful what you've said. Jen, I want you to pick up on that from a different perspective, because you were talking to us through the break about the importance of healthy disciplines. And Steve's just been talking about discipline. How's that spelled out for you as you work with children?
Yeah, I think discipline is a really interesting word, Mike.
Sounds like a negative word.
It does sound negative, doesn't it? And often people think discipline, I'm just correcting my child. But the point of discipline is actually to correct them in a way that's better for their life, better for even the moment, and things that they learn so that in the future they don't have to make that mistake twice.
Are you saying that parents need to move past the moment and see long term?
Yes. Sometimes it's in the moment.
It's really hard when your kids suddenly say, well, I don't love you. Or, because you've laid down some regulations.
Yeah.
What would you counsel parents with?
I'd advise routines and just staying consistent. Consistent so that the kids know that expectation is always there, and it's spoken with love. Sometimes we don't want to be patient in the moment and we just get really frustrated. But to speak from a place of, okay, I'm taking you on this journey, both now and long term. Okay,
you guys, I'm going to put your feet to the fire.
Uh-oh.
Let's say single parents are listening today, or maybe couples, and they would say, honestly, we really don't have any discipline. How do you start? Where would you start?
It's going to be hard. They have to first come into that. But what my wife and I have done is when you make the rules and the guidelines for the discipline, you do it with the kids. Not just here's a list. This is when you're doing this and this. It's with the children, especially if they're older. Then they can speak into it. It doesn't have to be everything that they say, but at least they know that they have a say. And okay, these are what the rules are.
That's very helpful, Jen. What's your read on it?
Well, Mike, I was thinking of something you said earlier about training a child in the way they should go. So when you're disciplining, you need to know what way you're wanting to train them in. So what would you think about that, Mike? How do you train a child based on the passage you even read today in the way that they should go?
Well, it seems to me that I need to model what that means. And not to pretend that I'm a child again,
right?
But to talk to them about why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I also think there's something very important that we need to be intentional in bringing in the spiritual dynamic. Yeah. Now, this show is all about what Jesus can do in our lives when he's front and center. How do you bring Jesus into the conversation in your home? And what would be a starting point if parents have never done that before?
That's a great question, Mike. When my kids were really young, my husband actually turned to me one night and he said, how do we bring Jesus into our home? And I thought about that question later and I thought, you know what? Just by having Jesus be real in my life. His love is real. It's not something I just have to wait till I get to heaven for, but have it transform me and model that in the way I live. Peace really can overcome me, or just live in a place of joy, even in the challenges of life.
How do you think that has changed you as a parent?
Oh, it's changed me night and day.
One example.
One example, it's hard to pick one, Mike, but it would probably be even at night, you know, when I'm having my own challenges as a parent or my own meltdown moments, saying, you know what, mommy needs a bit of a timeout where I can just spend some time with my Father who strengthens me.
Your Heavenly Father.
My Heavenly Father, yeah,
Okay.
who gives me that patience that I wouldn't normally even
So
have.
you actually pause and take some time to pray
I
and
do.
pull back. And
And sometimes I'm surprised. I have so much patience in this moment. I didn't think I normally would.
I read a story about a lady, her name was Hannah Wesley. She had 19 children.
19.
And the way she
Yikes.
kept her sanity was that every day she safeguarded an hour for herself to pray and to be
Right.
quiet and to reflect. Interesting. Steve, what do you
And
do?
that's one of the, just to bounce off Jen, is in order for us to take care of our children spiritually, we need to be taking care of ourselves. And spiritually, emotionally, any such way, it's, and then our kids see that as well, us taking care of ourselves. But something I did learn from my parents was routine. And so for instance, mealtime. Mealtime was huge for my parents growing up.
Mine
There
too.
was 8 kids in my family, but we got together for breakfast and for dinner. It worked out in our schedules. But not only that, we got together, but we also read the Bible and prayed for every meal, before and after every meal. So there was a key part of our family life. So that became, and it was a key part of my wife's, Jana's family as well. So when we had kids, that just became a no-brainer. Okay, this worked well for us to keep Jesus at the center of our home. We're going to continue doing this as well. Not that it's a legalistic or something that you have to do. It's something that, yeah, we really want to do this because we see the value.
I'm going to ask both of you to come back next week as we talk more about how that happens and shapes our lives. You're listening to Find the Way. I'm Mike Sherbinell. I hope that you'll open up your heart today to the love of Jesus, and you can do that by simply saying, Lord, I want to start walking with you. And if you call out to him that way, he will hear that prayer. Why don't you call us at Find the Way? Write to us at findtheway.faith, and there's a phone number there you can call as well. We'd love to chat with you. Thanks for being with us
Thank
today.
you so much.